when the suffragist movement began, it was essentially wealthy women, and they were in their parlors or in their beautiful homes, and they needed to bring it to a wider group. And so they would take their cars into a rural or a small town setting, and they would drive into the center of town, and they would hop on the sideboards, and they would essentially give their speech. And they would take their slogans, they would paint them on sheets, and they would hang them on the side of the car. And that became the precursor to the modern bumper sticker. Thank you. I want to welcome you all, and also a warm welcome to those online. I'm excited to be here and to tell you about my book, Women Behind the Wheel. I wrote this book for a couple of reasons, and one of the reasons was that I wanted to memorialize a kind of car culture that I don't think exists anymore, and that is, the American muscle car, the street racing, the heavy misogyny that went along with the advertising. Things have definitely changed. But I also wrote this book because I think we're at a very important time in the life of the automobile. Things are definitely going to change. We're going to have autonomous vehicles. We now have electric vehicles. We will soon have self-driving taxis. So things are changing dramatically. And so what I was hoping to do when I wrote the book, in my more lucid moments, was to take a look at car history and slow things down a little so that when we fully experience these new vehicles, we can be informed consumers. And specifically for women, we can be more informed and aware of what's going around. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book and talk a little bit, but it's only going to be about 15 minutes. And I want to start with my dad, because if my personal story was the engine that drives the book, my dad was the beginning of this all. He was a car salesman. He was very difficult. He was very hard to understand. He lied about almost everything. Lying was a way of life for him. It was deeply embedded in his professional identity as a car salesman. I write about him this way in my book. My father sold used and new cars in our town. He dressed the part of a car salesman as well as he played it. At nearly 6'4", he was unmistakable in his lime green leisure suits with white belts and matching shoes. His slick-back silver hair was a perfect match for black shirts paired with white ties and checkerboard sports jackets. He drove a Dodge Charger, one of the most powerful vehicles ever to hit the city streets in the United States. It was a lightweight car with a big engine and a loud muffler, a vehicle popular with young men just back from Vietnam. I can picture him alone in the small shack at the back of the lot, feet perched on an old aluminum desk. Cigarette hanging from his mouth, he was slow to get up, but a fast talker once he reached you. My father lied whether it served a purpose or not. He lied about which grocery store he went to and whether the car was insured or whether there was oil in the burner. Lying was part and parcel of his business. My father would often drive the latest models, trying to gin up interest from the factory workers in town. This meant we had a new car every week. We rode around in one stylish model after another, the price tag stuck on the rear window, small paper squares beneath our feet to protect the carpet, that new car smell filling our nostrils. Our bank account may have been empty, but the gas tank was always full. So we were a poor family. We were rich in automobiles, iconic, and some very extremely cool ones. And my family seemed to really gravitate to these iconic models. So in my book, I talk about my mother's Chevy Impala convertible. It was stylish and impractical. It was perfect for my mother, who was also stylish and wildly impractical. My parents had divorced when I was 5, and this car in my mind, and certainly in the book, came to embody many romances that she had as a divorced woman. It was a little scandalous to be divorced back then in the small town where I grew up. But as I do in the book, what I try to do is take some personal experience, so my mother's romances, and say something more universal about the car. And we take this fact for granted now, but cars forever changed the landscape of romance. They took it from the front porch to the back seat. So let me explain just briefly what I mean by that. Prior to the advent of the car and dating, as we think of it, as it happens within the automobile, courting was coordinated by the mother in the home, who invited the young man to visit the woman. And it was very supervised activity. There were lots of people around. Extended family was there. If things were progressing, maybe you had a small amount of time privately on the front porch, but it was a constructed kind of situation. The car changed that dramatically. Within a very short period of time, men were then just driving up to the house and driving off with your daughter, right? And the way I put it in the book is that short of the birth control pill, no other technological advancement has shaped women's romantic lives as much as the car. And I try to make this clear in the book, but women reaped enormous rewards, but they also paid an enormous price. They were liberated on the one hand to do all sorts of things. They could go, they could get jobs, they could have social lives, but on the other, it left them open to a tremendous amount of sexual violence. So in my book, I write about my mother and her car like this. She drove a used light blue Chevy Impala convertible from the 1960s. The car had white vinyl bucket seats and the shift was on the steering wheel column. She drove fast, and if she had to stop on short notice, she flung her arm across my chest in the impromptu seatbelt move common to mothers of the day. In the first instance, the car seemed to have liberated my mother. She was striking, 5'9" and thin. And if she wasn't exactly beautiful, she certainly gave the impression of great beauty. Perhaps it was her clothes, which were both meticulous and impractical. Boucle suits in winter, and in summer, starched skirts with dozens of tiny pleats she ironed by hand, only to watch their sharp edges wilt in the unrelenting heat and humidity. Her car was as fashionable as her clothes and equally impractical. So this theme of women and fashion runs deep throughout the history of the car. From the beginning, there was an expectation that women would look good while they were driving. And it was a very gendered expectation. And so during the course of my research, I did a lot of things. But one of the things I did was I found this quote from Ladies' Home Journal. And so this is in 1915. And the lovely editors of Ladies' Home Journal suggested that women wear a tailored gown of black satin with a white collar and a small, close-fitting hat with a veil of the finest mesh. So the point that I'm trying to make is that driving was this performative and gendered act. And fashion and cars evolved together. So I had this one. One of the things I did was go to the New York Public Library. And I spent a lot of time up there, and I found this, which is really a fascinating document. It's about 100 pages long. It's remarkable in that it gives a variety of outfits that women are being offered to wear in their automobiles. The early automobile was quite open. It wasn't enclosed. You were exposed to the elements. Women needed hats, gloves, veils, and some things that I think are really, maybe weren't practical to them, but seem odd to me. Like, this is a full-length ermine coat that she was advised to wear. And it really was really elaborate. It went on and on. And this would evolve throughout the years. So here we have, those are the Ford Motor Mates. So this is from, that's a 1953 Ford Victoria. And her coat on the left, which is the shorter kind of cream color coat, is actually a car coat. So the origination of the car coat was for women to be able to get in and out of the car. The handbag that the other woman is clasping is made out of the vinyl of the interiors. So these Objects were sold by Ford, and they were to coordinate and accessorize with a particular model that you were then buying at the dealership. Very similarly over here, this is a 1958 Chevy Biscayne. And you can see in the ad, she's matching her dress to her paint color. But, try it. But I wrote about this theme of women and clothes and cars in my book, and I went to the chapter where I really delved into this has to do with my sister. My sister was about 9 years older than me. She was really an idol. She was very beautiful. It was probably the late 1960s. She had tremendously good clothes, and I just loved her, and I loved her Ford Mustang. My sister's Mustang, a red convertible with a white interior that our father bought for her, was a fast car, but she drove it slowly. She was absent-minded and unhurried in the way of many great beauties. She would play with her hair while she drove, shifting gears and flicking her hair in a kind of rhythmic beat. Flick, shift, flick, shift. Her car was a bright and happy little dream built for idealistic and irreverent baby boomers on a budget. It was a fashion statement made of steel, a perfect backdrop to her mod prints, lace mini dresses, halter tops, and fringed suede jackets. A well-known ad at the time encouraged women to wear a Mustang to match her lipstick. And while my sister never took that fashion advice, she certainly always looked good in her little red car. So I'm very excited about this. Ford just gave me permission to use this last week. This is the ad. This ran in 1966 in 17 magazine. And here's the deal. There were 3 of these Mustangs, and you had to write an essay, and you could win them. I know that one continues to be in existence now. It's obviously quite an expensive vehicle. And this is also this weird cult thing where you can buy towels at Target that have this ad on it. So I'm not fully able to explain why Target would have that on their towels, but I will tell you it's a big piece of car history. And so my book goes on like this, telling a story about each car we drove and relating it to some kind of theme or other important issue about cars. And in essence, in total, what I'm trying to do is tell a story about how the car came to shape the modern woman. And the best example of this is probably the minivan. My husband and I bought a big plum mini Honda Odyssey in 1995. It was literally purple. Honda's tagline echoed the famous phrase that starts the Indianapolis 500. It was, "Ladies and gentlemen, start your families." That's what we did. My son was born that year. And women of my generation were among the first to work in large numbers outside the home. Now, we weren't the first women to have jobs, I'm not saying that. But in large numbers, as our cohort started to move into professions, into the work world, we really did make a difference and we really did change things. And Detroit was really keen, and they were very aware of this major demographic shift. And the minivan was actually a vehicle that was designed to help women manage their dual roles of motherhood and profession. Marketing studies at the time used words such as racing, juggling, and balancing. And let's be clear that prior to the invention of the minivan and the working mother, these words were most often used to describe circus performers and not females. And you often did feel like a circus performer trying to meet your dual roles of being at the office and then getting the kids at 3. So here are a few paragraphs from my book on the minivan. Automakers set out to capitalize on this time crunch for women, turning the minivan into an additional domestic space, complete with video screens, study trays for kids, cup holders for drinks, vacuums for spilt food, and in one prototype, a washer and dryer that could be used at sports practices. Fast food restaurants and the makers of packaged food were quick to notice the trend and began testing burritos for one-handed convenience, so they could be eaten while driving, and making yogurt a sippable snack instead of something likely to slip off a spoon into the netherworld between the seats. They were clear about what they were doing. Mothers tend to form their lives and schedules around the needs of their children, the director of corporate research at Chrysler told the Washington Post. Children need a vehicle they can be picked up in, change clothes in, and be taken to the next activity in, and the minivan is it. Automakers conceived of a van as a kind of mobile living room where children were fed and nurtured, a kind of womb where a warm beverage was always nearby. Cue the need for cup holders in cars. The Subaru Ascent has 19. So many cup holders, the Wall Street Journal recently quipped, "We've reached peak cup holder." And I love this. This is one of the first images I had when I started working on the book. And it really is such a packed image. You can see this is a prototype of a van that was never made. It was a kind of a vehicle that was trotted out to design shows and car shows so people could see the possibilities of the minivan. But the very idea that you could conceive of putting a washer and dryer in the back of a minivan, and she has that's a little refrigerator she has there, and she has the drinks. And I actually got really fascinated by the color of her sweater. You notice how pink it is. So my point really being is that nothing really was lost on the car companies about how women's lives were changing. And on the one hand, they were drivers of those changes. They were making sure that we had what we needed to be in these different roles. But on the other hand, they were also responding to women. So I started out this talk telling you I wanted to consider the history of women in cars so that we could be more mindful as changes come down the road. But I want to end on a final note of concern about autonomous and connected vehicles. As many of you are aware, vehicles send dozens of pieces of data from sensors and cameras to manufacturers and third-party providers. So much so that the FCC has recently approved a special channel called Vehicles to Everything. And then I write in the book, and at the end of the book, about why this concerns me. For most women, most of the time, cars are tools. We aren't headed out to joyride. In an era in which women's bodies are heavily politicized, does your car know that you've driven a friend or your daughter across state lines to an abortion clinic, a procedure that is not legal in the state in which your car is tagged and registered? Such a drive might make you an accomplice to an illegal procedure. So who has that trip report? Who does your car alert about your trip to the abortion clinic? In another possible scenario, can your abusive spouse track your car? The car was one of the first routes of escape for abused women. But will that escape route still work if your husband can disable your car through an app on his phone? Will teenage kids ever know the whistling sound of freedom if their mother is using the devices on the family car to track their every move? So much has changed since I was young, and I could spin my car around and around in an empty parking lot after a light snow while the cops looked the other way and my boyfriend whooped from the passenger side. Will the kids ever know that special spark? Tesla and other high-end vehicles now have large touch screens mounted to the dash. Ultimately, some of that space will be sold to advertisers. Is it possible you will have to scroll through 6 ads before your car will start? Yes, I think you can bet on it. And for sure, the baby will be screaming in the car seat, and your husband will be fuming, and you will be late for work. More stress for mother, indeed. Our attention is a commodity, and our time is precious. But those commodities are now being sold to the highest bidder without ever knowing who is profiting. Nowhere is this more clear than in the development of the vehicle tomorrow, and no one should care more about this than women whose attention spans are already split between home and work and children to a frazzling degree. So, given that I've now taken up about 15 minutes of your precious time, Amy is going to come over, but I want to end with one quote. And I want to paraphrase the wonderful writer James Baldwin. Baldwin famously said that art exists to answer the questions that have been papered over by the answers. And for me, in this case, I wanted to unearth questions about the car that I think have been papered over, paved over by car culture. So Amy and I have those questions set, and thank you for your listening.
Everybody, Nancy, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I so enjoyed the selections that you read and some of the context behind it and some of the images that aren't included in the book that were so much fun to see. I'm going to have to ask my mother if she matched in any way to her brown Mustang that she loved so much in the 70s. So we're going to start tonight with just a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience afterwards, and I look forward to hearing from those on Zoom as well. So one thing that really struck me about the structure of your book was how origin stories often, were the thing that anchored each chapter. And the origin stories were not just about your life, although of course there were certain seminal moments that are discussed, but about the cars that were driven at that time. And I wondered if you might share some of your most significant discoveries about the origins of some of those iconic vehicles.
So Amy's also a writer, a specialist in narrative nonfiction, which is what I do. And when I was working on the book, I wanted each of the cars to be a character, right? I wanted them to be exciting on the page. And in terms of origin stories, there are two probably that would come to mind. The one that people probably don't know well is that the Volkswagen Bug was commissioned by Adolf Hitler. It was designed by Ferdinand Porsche. It would later morph into this sort of hippie peace and love vehicle. It was promoted by Jewish admin from New York, who really made it hit the college students and the young people at the time. So that's a remarkable trajectory for a car. Yes. And I can tell you more about that if you'd like. And the other thing, because I was just talking about the minivan, I was astounded to learn about the origins of Honda. So I had been a reporter and an editor, and I worked at the Harvard Business Review, and I felt comfortable, like I knew things. And then I discovered that Soichiro, excuse me for not pronouncing that right, Honda, started his company, and here's how it worked. It was the end of World War II, there were shortages. His wife was running around trying to get rice on the black market. She wanted to feed the family, right? And he was not helping with this. He was just not willing to help. And she said, well, you have to come help with this. And he was like, no way am I doing that. So what he did was he put a motor on a bicycle. And eventually that became the way the Honda Motor Company began, right? And here it was, this very gendered thing where he's saying, no, I'm not going to do the chores, even though we are in this unusual wartime situation, but I can create a vehicle that will help you.
Right. It's fascinating to me to think that rather than doing the chores himself, he would go to these great lengths and eventually start, a successful company that came to rival all of the American manufacturers as well. But it starts with the problem of who's going to do the errands.
Right, and he was a brilliant engineer, a brilliant businessman. It was a brilliant company, and I loved my Honda Pilot, but it's just crazy to think about how these things began.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Another thing is that so many of these origin stories are really a reflection of embedded gender roles in America. So we talked a little bit about that through the Honda, but others mark propulsive change for women. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how women were both freed but also newly constrained by car companies' appeals to them in advertising. We spoke a little bit about that in your talk, but there's so much in the book about the expectations for expanded domestic duties, not just continuing them, but actually adding on to them through cars.
So what happened was in the 1920s, the car companies, specifically GM, realized that in order to become a mass market, create a mass market, women, they were going to have to appeal to women. And so the ad at the time said, "A car for her too." So it became imperative to the car industry to have women drive cars and own cars. But they had to appeal to women without alienating men. And the way they did that was to actually advertise to men and say, look, she can do everything she's asking you to do on the weekend if you just buy her a car. And so women were freed in the sense that, yes, they had automobiles and they could go and they could do things themselves. The flip side of that was they had to go do these things. So where once women's domestic labor was well seen, she was baking a pie, she was hanging the laundry, it became more hidden and invisible, especially when it's being done now at 60 miles an hour.
Oh, I love the way you put that. It reminds me so much of my mother's single mother moving me through my day and her own day, and most of it, I'd say probably 60% of it taking place in the car. And just how much her life was governed by moving from one place to another to essentially either care for me or care for the two of us together.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you. Something that I really love as a writer, too, about your book is the braided narratives that you use. This is a work that I might call literary journalism, in which there is the story of cars and their history as a tool of both freedom and oppression for women, but there's also your own story that starts, as you said, with your father and his job. And I feel that these stories often echo one another in some really beautiful ways. And I wondered if you might speak just a little bit about how you wove these two narratives together, particularly in the sense that through your family story, certain experiences track across generations. And just as cars also have different generations of specific models, there's a linear story, but some things come back over and over again. So how did that affect the writing of the book in terms of its braided structure?
So it was just a very difficult book to write. I did it in two pieces. I did first most of the difficult personal writing, and published that with True Story, which is a small magazine. Then I connected with my now agent, Reiko Davis at DeFiore, and she and another agent named Allison Lewis had the brilliant idea to really work on this as a book about women in cars, a kind of generational, as you're saying, history of them. And so then once I knew that was the direction I was going, I had to find 2 points that would, as you say, echo. So for example, my uncle was killed in a car accident when he was, say, 6 or 7. And my beautiful athletic son, at one point when he was a child, jumped right in front of a speeding BMW. And so I was able to take those experiences and make them work together. My father's lying became a set piece for the kind of multiple manipulations of marketing and advertising that occur within the car industry. So I was able to get both of these things going, and it was challenging.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. One of the things I was so struck by was the connection between generational trauma and generations of vehicles. And so as much as life moves forward and cars progress, certain staple experiences come up again and again. And I'm really struck by what we carry forward in our lives from one generation to the next. I think your book does an excellent job of showing that, of course, we're moving forward in our lives but we're going to reconnect with experiences along the way, and things that happened in the past are likely to crop back up in new forms in the future too.
Well, or you'll have a new experience of it, right?
Right.
So I am not, thank God, I'm not my grandmother who lost a child, right? But I still have that experience. And what does that experience speak to? And it speaks to who gets to own the landscape, right? Can little boys run free?
Right.
And what impact did the car have on us? And I think I really did try to get people to stop the speeding automobile so we can think about it.
Yes. Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. Another thing that I noticed here, you make no bones about the detrimental effects of car ownership on women. But one of the most moving moments in the book for me is when the narrator has to give up her beloved Honda Pilot because of its intense experience connected to it. So I wondered if you might just talk a little bit about the way that not only do cars serve as the sort of mobile domestic space, but also a sacred space for women as well.
So I loved my Honda Pilot. And it was, for me, a kind of church. I used to play the rosary in it. And Roland Barthes, who's a French philosopher, said that the car is the cathedral of our time. And cars are designed to be interiors are intimate. There's a lot of soundproofing. They're big. My Pilot had big bucket seats. As I said in my talk, there are warm liquids there. So it really is a cathedral-like church-type atmosphere. And I really felt like I was very odd driving around Boston listening to the rosary, and it would really freak people out if I went to a valet parking and I forgot to turn it off. But what I realized when I was doing it, like I would be sitting in a parking lot at Starbucks, and I started to realize there were a lot of women sitting alone in their cars. You know, not everyone was praying. Some people were knitting. Somebody was talking to their mother. And that really became clear during COVID.
Yes.
When people took, like, in droves to their cars to put these reels on Instagram.
Yes.
Right? And now you have the car confessional on Instagram. It's a thing.
It totally is a thing. Yes, yes. And it was so important in the pandemic to have that space that was private but could also take you somewhere that wasn't your home and its walls.
Correct.
Yes. And it also makes me think, because your book so often, my mother is around your age as well, and my experience, I think, would be closer to your son's, growing up with a mother who was working and taking care of things at home at the same time. But I remember the car for us being a really important space of connection. We'd be moving between, grocery store and piano lesson and Girl Scout meeting and everything that she and I had to do. That we weren't always at home having dinner together. We weren't always sitting down in the living room and having conversations. We almost always had our most impactful conversations in the car because of that privacy, I think, because of that intimate space of the interior. So for us, that was almost a place of détente, especially during my teenage years. When we were in the car, it was like, okay, whatever we're mad about, we're just going to put aside, and we would talk about almost everything else. So that was where I got to really know my mother, was in the car. So that was so moving for me.
I think that's a common experience. And if you're a mother of boys, if you have the soccer team in the car, you learn everything.
Oh my goodness,
right?
I can imagine.
They don't, because they think, oh, well, she's not really paying attention to me, right?
Right, yes. Oh, wow. I can't wait for my daughter to reveal herself in those moments. We're almost there. One story that I had never heard about, this was something that I thought was so interesting when you were talking in the book about bumper stickers. But that connects back to an earlier story of how the suffragists used cars in order to, spread their message and their desire for the vote across the country. I wonder if you might speak a little bit about the car as a political operative for women.
Right. So the car was really crucial for suffragists in this country. And when the suffragist movement began, it was essentially wealthy women, and they were in their parlors or in their beautiful homes. And they needed to bring it to a wider group. And so they would take their cars into a rural or a small town setting, and they would drive into the center of town, and they would hop on the sideboards and they would essentially give their speech. And they would take their slogans, they would paint them on sheets, and they would hang them on the side of the car. And that became the precursor to the modern bumper sticker. So the car has been really important in a lot of social justice issues. It was certainly important to the suffragists. It was used quite a lot by African Americans who were trying to boycott either public transportation or streetcar transportation in their fight for integration. In the book, I talk about several very troubling recent experiences where Trump supporters surrounded and forced a Biden bus to exit during the last election. So cars are never politically neutral. They're big actors in all sorts of social justice movements.
Absolutely. My husband will often look at a car's bumper sticker before he decides if he's going to let somebody go ahead of him. So he's like, not you. I don't like that bumper sticker. So yeah, no, it's true. And you know, at that incident with the Biden campaign bus, that was really profound for me, watching that unfold on the news and realizing that road rage can be inspired by somebody's bumper sticker. So if you don't like the way somebody's driving, but they're also expressing a view you don't have, it seems like a sort of perfect storm for road rage accidents.
I think you have to be very careful. It is very easy to stereotype someone driving a car, right? The rich lady in the Rover or the fat guy in the pickup truck. Right. You need to be very, very careful, and it's quite it happens quite fast.
Yes, and that's another facet you talk about in the book, how your Subaru was associated with lesbianism. And so, you know, cars becoming iconic of a lifestyle and a social class, and not just, you know, a way to get around or the most practical car for the terrain you drive on, but an expression of one's identity, and how often that can lead to assumptions about one's politics or social positions, and that can be very damaging to our social fabric, I think. Yeah.
Well, they're social signifiers, right? Right. I'm a Cambridge lady and I drive a Prius. That says something.
Yes.
Right? And I think we all need to be a little bit careful about stereotyping each other, but especially in our society where we don't have rank, we don't wear military uniforms, we're not duchesses. We have to buy our status, and cars are a big part of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. So one thing that I didn't realize, my mother and my aunts and grandparents, whenever I would get a new kitchen appliance and it would break within 6 months, they would always say, they don't make them like they used to. And this was in reference to stoves and toasters and washing machines. And we've come, I think, to understand what you call planned obsolescence, where, you know, our phones are not meant to be just updated forever. You're going to have to replace your phone if you want access to particular apps or functions. We're used to replacing our laptops, maybe every 4 or 5 years. But I was unaware that car manufacturers were doing this earlier, during that time when people would say things were made to last. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that strategy and its importance maybe to how we acclimate to that as Americans.
So planned obsolescence, the arrival of the new and improved model so that you had to trade up and you let go of your old one, was an actual strategy of car companies that began right around the 1920s. It, besides just being infuriating, as your mother so correctly said, it was particularly dangerous, and here's why. Because at the same time that we had the new and improved models and people jockeying to get the best car for social position, we had the beginning of consumer debt. And consumer debt became quite accepted around the same time. Mm-hmm. So let's fast forward now. Let's say we're in the end of World War II, right after World War II. So now you're having this mixed kind of expression. So I need the new car for social status, and I have easy credit. Mm-hmm. So when my father was a car salesman, for example, the tagline that many of you will probably remember was, small down payment, 24 easy monthly payments.
Right.
Today, a car loan can be 60 months long.
Yes.
It can be longer. It can be 72. So let's take the single mother that would be like your mother or my mother today. If she buys a used car, she buys it with a loan. It might last her 3 years. Let's say she does even better. It lasts her 4 years. At the end of she still has 3 years where she's paying on that loan with a car that doesn't work. And we're assuming that she needs this car to get to work. So what has happened is the new and improved and the easy access to credit has made cars a real important driver of economic injustice.
Yes.
It's so hurts people who are unable to pay cash for cars.
Right, right. I have, right now, my husband and I own a 2007 Chevy Cobalt. It is pretty beat to hell at this point. It's got dents on the side from when I had to drive off the road during a hurricane. It's been rear-ended a couple of times. You know, it doesn't look great. It's not a pretty car, but we keep sinking a few $100s a year into repairing it because that's cheaper ultimately than replacing it, especially right now with the used car shortage and the price of used cars.
I think that is easing.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing that I discovered in writing the book is that women pay about $7,000 more over the life of their car for repairs because they aren't good at negotiating the original purchase price. I think they're wonderful. I love cars. I love writing about cars. I love talking about cars. But there's a real piece of them that are difficult for women.
Yes, absolutely. I thought that was amazing to learn that women were paying more at the outset, that they were expected almost to pay more. And do you think women were aware that they were being taken advantage of?
I think women are terribly frightened by the showroom experience. I have never personally purchased a car for that reason.
Right.
I think it's getting better. I think women are getting better at negotiating skills. I think car companies are getting way better about how they treat women. I'm really hopeful. There's a lot more transparency, say from Carvana and other internet sites, but it's a thing, let me tell you.
Oh, it really is. And it makes me think, too, of another feature of the book where you describe how, often women default to men when one or the other is about to get into the car. The man often gets into the driver's seat, the woman often in the passenger seat. Men often go to the showroom. Women pick the color at times. That's sort of their role. So there are these ways in which women, in order to avoid some of the unsavory parts of car ownership, end up relying on the men in their lives, even as they're clamoring for more freedom.
Yes, it's true.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking when I read that part of your book that I can't remember the last time my husband and I approached the car and I went for the driver's seat first. I really can't.
It is statistically rare.
Wow, amazing. Something I really appreciated about the book was how you described women's relationship to their vehicles as somewhat complex and even contradictory. This was the sort of thing that we often hear about virtue signaling with electric vehicles, things like that. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the examples you use in the book where there's a sort of false choice. We think that if we make the right choice of car, we're making a difference. How is that often false?
In my view, this is really my opinion, right? It's very hard to buy a car. So let's say you're going to buy an electric car, and I am not at all negative about electric cars, but it's easy to buy an electric car and think, I'm making a big difference for the environment. And correct, you are. But what's harder to look at when you purchase a car is the entire life of that car, the energy that's embedded within it being made, it being transported. Clearly, there are advantages to electrics when it comes to emissions, but there are lots of questions about electrics, including a tremendous amount of e-waste that's coming in the newer vehicles with the screens, the GPS, et cetera. So I think one of the things I write about in my book is how to really try to get your head around what this is about. Like, how do we think about what we're purchasing in a way that's rational, and it's very, very difficult to do. My first book was a book about the environment, and while I was writing it, I bought my SUV.
Right.
So it's not like I'm immune to any of these things. It's just I'm trying to get people to be maybe more aware of them.
Absolutely. Well, it reminds me of, everybody converting for a bit to reusable straws, and this notion that if you use plastic straws or paper straws, that you are contributing to the degradation of the environment. You need to have metal straws, and that places the onus back on individuals to save the world from problems caused by corporations, as you describe in the book very well, using your hometown.
Well, I think it's very hard for us to get a grasp on consumerism, on the entire sort of spectrum of consumerism, and what we buy and what we use and how long we have it.
Right.
Like, how long will you have your Tesla with the screen, right? Will you be driving, a 1950s car? Some of those are still on the road. So
Absolutely.
it's a very complex discussion, and it's hard to really get to the bottom of it.
Yes, yes. And I wondered, since you mentioned your SUV, why did you buy an SUV? How does that maybe explain a little bit about what women face on the road that makes it a false choice sometimes?
I personally bought the SUV because I wanted the comfort. I had had a surgery. My minivan was very bumpy, and it was very painful to be in it, and I was still driving my son, so I went for comfort. But I think the SUV is really important for women, and it's become an important vehicle for women because it gets you up higher. Right? And you can feel in that moment that you are more aggressive, you are more capable, you are not, and especially like when I was working, I was always getting pushed around at work, right? By some guy who was just had, I don't know, some bigger position than I had. So to be in a car, and when I was in the car and feel like I'm not at the whim of every guy who wants to cut me off. Now, I'm a very cautious driver, and I let everybody cut me off, but it was like, yes, finally I have some, oomph here.
Yes. I love that you are a cautious driver in Massachusetts.
Yes, that's right.
That is a very, you deserve a medal for that identity. That's amazing. But my mother feels the same way. She started driving SUVs for really just, that was what she could afford. She was really intimidated the first time she got into our Chevy Suburban, but she can't go back now. She just had to get a new car, and she's like, I know it's bad for the environment, but I just feel safer in a bigger car,
right.
Even if that's not necessarily true how she feels as a woman.
I think some early SUVs really had rollover problems. I think they're definitely safer. And I think the feeling of being higher is just, I think it's more comfortable for some people.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Susan, would you like me to move on? Yeah. So I do have other questions if we get into a lull, but I would love to hear from the audience. Anybody want to ask Nancy a question?
So I'm going to start off with a Zoom audience question, picking up on the SUV. This is a perfect question. So is it correct that women's love of SUVs propelled this type of model vehicle into great popularity? And so I think you've talked about that, you're higher up. So is that correct that the SUV, let me just read the question. Is it correct that women's love of SUVs propelled this type of model vehicle into great popularity?
I don't specifically know the answer to that. What I would say is it couldn't have been a successful vehicle without women, right? And it is a widely popular type of vehicle for women, right? Women don't, by and large, buy pickup trucks. So, and interestingly enough, like the Porsche Cayenne, which is an SUV, so many women bought that the Porsche company feared gender contamination, which is too many women driving Porsches, men won't think driving a Porsche is cool. So it's a roundabout way of answering the question, saying I'm not entirely certain, but it does make sense to me.
And then one more Zoom question, and then I'll get to the in-person audience. So it's a question from David. What are your thoughts about women in the many-faceted world of automotive racing?
Well, it's so much better than when I was growing up. I write in the book about my kind of a childhood idol was Shirley Cha-Cha Muldowney, and she was a drag racer, and I just loved her. And there are so many more women who are active and doing a wonderful job, and it's so many groups of women who are in that world now as fans, as consumers of that. I think it's really fantastic.
Yeah.
Are there questions for our audience members? Okay, here we go.
Nancy, I'm curious, your research was mostly women in the US, but what's your perspective on women and the liberation vis-a-vis cars in Europe and elsewhere, like Saudi Arabia just recently allows women to drive. I travel to Middle East quite a bit these days, and I still see very, very few women drivers. What's your perspective on that, if you have any, please?
I do write about this in the book. I'm delighted that the women of Saudi Arabia can drive. It was upsetting to me that during the time I was writing the book, there were still women in jail for driving. And that was remarkable to me because I had grown up so free. And so even though car culture was part of my family, and in some ways it was not available to me, I certainly got in and out of the car with great ease. So it's my great hope that governments are, as you can see in Saudi Arabia, are coming to realize the importance of that. Now, what those societies are not going to be able to get around is what's embedded in the vehicle itself. As I said in my talk, women will have great freedom, but they'll be open to great tragedy as well. And how that will play out in those cultures is a little bit beyond me to know. I think it will be fascinating. And I do think they will experience economic growth if they're able to let go of the reins.
Any other questions?
Hi, thank you. Nancy, I've known you for a long time, and I never knew you were such a car gal. This book came around. But I'm curious whether you've noticed, having grown up in the Midwest around Chicago, are women more like overtly involved in cars, in your experience there, at least when you were young, as compared to your female friends here?
I would say that there is a very Midwest thing about what are you driving today, or what kind of tires you got on that. And that is still a very Midwestern thing. And I ran into this woman. I went back to my hometown. I went to a car event there. And she had redone, her husband had died, and she redid his Mustang. And she baked his ashes into the paint. And I mean, I was so overwhelmed by the story. I mean, and I was so enamored of this woman. And this car won the award. I mean, it had to win the award because she was in there, right? It was beautiful. She did an amazing, amazing job. I'm looking out at a sea of my female friends here in Boston. I'm wondering, are we going to bake our husbands into our car? No, it's not a Boston thing.
Nancy, we have another question from a member of our Zoom audience. My question, so much good has come from cars and mobility, but I'm curious about violence in cars. They are responsible for a very high number of deaths. Yeah. You mentioned death of your uncle by car. What role does violence, rise of drunk driving, et cetera, play in your narrative?
So overall, about 40,000 people die in car accidents a year. It has always been believed by the police that some of those are intentional. There's a great deal of use of the car as a weapon. Specifically, for example, we saw it in the George Floyd demonstrations where they were hit by cars. There's a tremendous amount of violence that takes place in cars that's never reported. A great number of date rapes are never reported. So I don't shy away from that in the book. I try to get people to really focus on that number. 40,000 people a year does not include the people that we're losing to disability. It does not include the people that we're losing to asthma. The car is having a lot of impacts, and we're kind of not paying attention to it. And I try to, in a careful way and not a gaudy way, get people to focus on that.
Pete.
Are there other questions? So we have another question. So there's a question about a Honda minivan, okay? Why was the Honda minivan the most popular among vans available in the 2000s? A friend told me that when he went to purchase a Honda van, the dealer wouldn't deal, but insisted the selling was at list price. You have an opinion on that, Nancy?
No, I don't. I mean, I can tell you why the minivan was popular, because the doors don't swing open like this, right? The doors are often on a track that come all the way back. And what does that do? That means for a mother who is driving or a mother who is getting her kids out of the car, she always has a sight line to those children. And that was a really brilliant thing. Why the Honda? I'm not coming up with anything about why that would be the one. I don't even remember why we bought it, but it was a great car.
Any thoughts on the future of the car? We see all these. We see maybe after this. I wasn't here. All these constraints around traffic pollution, and then laws around speeding and controlling and taking pictures. And I mean, I love my speedy car, and to me it would be a tragedy that I wouldn't be able to take advantage of that. So I'm kind of wondering if what do you see 10 years from now, 15 years from now?
I see more traffic. I see cars connected possibly to highways. I don't see higher speeds. I think it's very interesting the way they set speed limits. So what traffic engineers do is they come up with a number. Like, let's say they think, all right, on this street, people are going to want to go like 50 miles an hour. And then they set the speed limit at 85% of that. It's a completely arbitrary thing. And I think what's baked into that kind of calculation is that people will always speed. But I think that there will be so much traffic and so much congestion that you can't do what I did. When I was a young girl, we would go out into the country and we would routinely hit 100 miles an hour. It was just a thing you did on Saturday nights, and you can't do that in Boston anywhere. So I think the future of the car is just not as sexy as it used to be.
Well, Nancy and Amy, I'd like to thank you for an absolutely terrific conversation. Thank you so, so very much. And I'd like to thank those of you in our in-person audience at our beautiful historic modern theater for joining us. And for our very, very robust Zoom audience, thank you also for being a part of this evening's conversation. So thank you and have a good evening.